You're right. You're absolutely right. We as trombone players should strive to play ideas that are just as angular, fast, interesting, and fresh sounding as our saxophone and piano playing colleagues. But let's be honest, playing that type of idea in time, in tune, with a good sound in a musical fashion on this instrument is very challenging. Now, I'm not saying that we as trombone players should get a pass on playing the more challenging parts of the improvisational language. Instead, I'm just suggesting that when it comes to dealing with these more difficult aspects of improvisation, today specifically working with diminished dominant sounds, instead of worrying so much about quote unquote keeping up with saxophone players, we need to find ways to make these sounds idiomatic and fit well on our instrument. What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in this week. Today we are dealing with diminished dominant, or the so-called half-whole diminished scale, some of the ideas that work well with that scale, and specifically some of the ways that we can make those work on trombone a little bit easier. Before we jump into things, just one little caveat. Like I said, I'm not recommending that we need to sort of like cop out on this area of improvisation. And by all means, if you feel like, those type of angular, very vertical ideas fit well for you as a player, go for it. Do them. I, in all honesty, wish I could play those things better. I am not a virtuoso by any means. I practice diligently, but the trombone has always been very, very difficult for me as a musician. It's the hardest part of what I do as a musician oftentimes. And so as somebody who's not a real virtuoso, I've always had to find ways to sort of adapt aspects of the language to make them work on this instrument. Now, if you're Marshall Jilks, if you're Elliot Mason, go for it. You can probably play a lot of this stuff that I only wish I could play. I think for the rest of us, though, I hope these ideas I'm going to present you today can help you find these sounds in a way that is a little more idiomatic to us as trombone players. To start with, let's talk about what this scale is. Now, we're not going to do an exhaustive study of sort of all the music theory ramifications of this scale. There are many. This is a really sort of like deep area of vocabulary, lots of different directions you can go. We are just going to talk a little bit about the baseline of the scale and a couple of key things to help you sort of organize ideas when you are playing this scale or using this sound. Now, as I mentioned, people call this the half-whole diminished. Some people call this the diminished dominant scale. There's a couple of different ways you can refer it, but it's basically when we see a flat 9 chord, specifically flat 9 with a natural 13. That would be the quote-unquote altered scale if we want to get really technical. These are very, very similar, just a couple notes that are different. All right, sorry to pop in here with my horrible cell phone audio, but I just wanted to make sure I clarified what I just said. I realized that when I was editing this that I kind of biffed it in the original video. The flat 13 appears in the altered scale. So an altered scale is another type of dominant scale. It has a flat 9, a sharp 9, a sharp 11, and a flat 13. It has no natural fifth. However, the diminished dominant scale, which we're working on today, has that flat 9 and sharp 9, the sharp 11 still, but then it has a natural fifth and a natural 13. Important to understand the distinction between those two. They sound very similar, and you can apply them in very similar ways, but the things we're talking about today really rely on the fact that you have that natural 13 and that natural 5. Just for clarity, that's why I wanted to pop in. So back to the lesson. But by creating this series of half steps and whole steps, they are consistent. Rather than being like some places where there are several whole steps in a row and then a couple half steps in a row or something like that, it's always half whole, half whole, half whole. This symmetrical scale gives us an interesting sound. So all of our examples today are going to be on G7 flat 9. So if we play this scale, it sounds like this. While we can start by building it with these half steps and whole steps, I actually think you'll find a little more success if you think about the alterations that are present in this scale. This scale has a flat 9, a sharp 9, both at the same time, and a major third. So, you might think about that as a G, an A flat, a B flat and a B natural, or you might think of it as an A sharp and a B natural. Really, for me, I don't know really which way I think about them in all honesty anymore. Probably as a B flat more than anything, so it's almost like there's a flat third and a major third at the same time. All the examples today, I tried to do the best I could to make accidentals as clear as possible, because there are a lot of accidentals in this sort of thing. But do whichever way works best for you. And then we also have a sharp 11, a regular 5th, a regular 13th, and then the flat 7. So our alterations at play are flat 9, sharp 11, and then it does also have a flat 7 because it's a dominant chord. That way of thinking, I think, is very preferable to kind of really getting the scale to work for you and understanding the ideas that you can create with it versus just thinking half whole. Half whole might get you started, but the more you can think about alterations will be better for you in the long run. As I said, there are a lot of different music theory avenues you can go on this scale. We're really only worried about one thing, and that is that there are two sets of notes that are going to anchor the little cells that we're going to work on today. One thing that's really great about the scale, because it's symmetrical, it really lends itself to these kind of cyclical patterns that sort of loop on each other, and those are going to be connected by two sets of notes in this scale. We are either generally going to tend to build ideas around the flat 9, the major third, the fifth, and the flat 7. That's going to be sort of one grouping, and we'll see that as we play through some of these ideas. And then the other grouping is going to be off of the root, the flat 9, the sharp 11, and then the 13th. Now, both of those actually form diminished seventh chords, both of those groupings, and that's sort of one of the things that connects all these dots in this particular scale. Again, we're not going to go too much deeper into the music theory than that, but remember those two groupings, either flat 9, major third, fifth, flat 7, or root, sharp 9, sharp 11, or 13th. Cool, let's get into our first idea that we're going to build. This one is going to be really scalar in nature, and that's one of the reasons I think it works well on trombone, because playing scales is something that fits well on this instrument versus playing a bunch of things with a lot of angular leaps in it. So the lick sounds like this. Very classic, you'll hear this all over the sort of improvisational vernacular. It is one that is built off of our flat 9, major third, fifth, and then flat 7. This motive starts on each one of those different chord tones or those different anchor notes, and then we move it through each one, again in this cyclical fashion. So the little motive sounds like this. We then start that on each one of those anchor notes, and just because of the shape of this motive, they sort of like run right into one another. That's why this sort of feels satisfying to play from a melodic standpoint. So if you're trying to get this together, you could start by just working on those little motives to understand a little bit of the theory. I know for me, I really love to move this stuff into context as soon as possible. One of the great places where you can apply this stuff is on 2-5-1s. And rather than just applying it on the dominant chord part, you certainly could do that, you could actually treat the entire 2-5-1 as sort of one long dominant chord to be able to access a little bit more of this sound. So in that example, I started on the flat 9 of G. Now, if I put that on the 2 chord, it's going to become the flatted fifth of the 2 chord. So if it was a minor 2-5, it would really fit very well. But even if it was a major 2-5, where the D minor chord was actually a D minor and not a D minor 7-5-5, it would still be cool. You know, it would be a little dissonant, but that's what you're trying to get here. This is a relatively crunchy sounding scale where we have some tension and release, and that's, I think, what we're trying to get at with this sort of sound. Cool, so that first idea is very scalar in nature. The second one has a few more jumps in it, but is actually one of the most common things that people play with this sort of sound. This is probably what we might refer to as like the David Baker diminished dominant lick. This one revolves around our root, sharp 9, sharp 11, and 13 set of notes to anchor sort of where the ideas are, and it relies on 2-note grouping, so it's always descending down a whole step from each one of those starting notes. Now that would certainly be one way to practice, is just understanding those 2-note groupings, but the real interesting part comes when you start to move it around in different ways, whether you're jumping up to the next grouping, jumping down to the next grouping, skipping over the groupings, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of different variations you could do with this sort of central idea. Before you jump too far into the deep end of the pool with this, I would start with just one of these and do it in small cells to really understand what is going on here. This one, we're going to start on any of those starting notes. We're going to jump up a note grouping and then skip down to the one below the one we started on and then return to the one we started on. So the lick would sound like this, the cell, I should say. We would then move that through all of our different starting notes, whether that be the root, the 13, the sharp 11, whatever, just to make sure we have total command over starting anywhere in the cycle. Now, just like our first idea, we can put this into a 2/5 as well. This is just an easy way to kind of cram this stuff in your playing at first so you can practice it and get it in context, and eventually you might be able to use it in a little more expansive way, but 2/5s are a great way to start getting this in. Now we're gonna do this one on a short 2/5 for no other reason than just to kind of show you some variety. You could work on a long 2/5 as well. The same principle, where we're gonna treat that entire 2/5 basically as a 5 chord so we can plug this idea in. In this case, we are gonna start on the root. And we're gonna use that same pattern we just did where we play the 2-note cell, then we jump up to the next one, we skip down one, and then we return to the first one we started on, and then we're gonna kind of resolve that to the 1 chord. This is the cell that we just practiced. Okay, our third and final idea for the day that I do think lays well on the trombone. This is definitely the most challenging. Those first two really sit well on the instrument, and if you're trying to access this sound, are a great place to start. Now, you definitely want to build up to more ideas, over your time practicing this, but those are good places to start. So this third one is a little more angular, has some jumps in it, but I think lays pretty well on the instrument. How you think of this one might vary. You could think of it starting on your root, sharp 9, sharp 11, 13, or you could think about it starting on the flat 9, major 3rd, 5th, and flat 7, because both those notes are present in the first cell. So if we start on a G, it's going to be G to A flat. So you could really think about either of those notes to kind of make it happen. But whatever way you think about it, it is a half step up and then a 4th up. We then move that and cycle it through our different starting notes. So if you're thinking in terms of I'm starting on the G, that's your actual anchor note, the next one you're going to start on is a B flat, and then on the C sharp, and then on the E natural going up a half step. If you were thinking that you're starting on the A flat, for example, I would probably think each note is a half step approach, going up to the A flat, that the A flat, the B natural, the D, and the F natural are like the anchor notes, and you're always starting a half step below those anchor notes and then jumping up a 4th to the top note of the little pattern or the cycle or the motive, Now this one's great because it also really works well going downward. Whichever way you think about it or whichever way you want to practice it, I would again start by sort of sorting out the individual cells first. So here, I'm going to think I start on the root. I then go up to starting on the sharp 9. Then the sharp 11. And then the 13. Now, just like our last licks, we can put this into a 2/5 as well in the same fashion, where we sort of don't even think about a 2, we just think about that entire 2-bar chunk as a 5 chord. You might want to be a little thoughtful about where you're starting this, so you're possibly ending up in a good way. In the end of this lick that I'm going to play, I did sort of change it just a little bit to make it sort of flow into the 1-chord resolution nicely, but the basic idea can fit really nicely over a 2/5. All right, so that's my take on how we can access some of this diminished dominant vocabulary and some of the sounds that the scale can create and make it work on trombone. Now, the thing about this is challenging. These are challenging things to execute, challenging things to hear, challenging things to play in tune. And especially once you start to stretch the harmony, if your intonation is not relatively on point, you're just gonna sound wrong. And that's one of the reasons why I think this stuff can be very difficult to incorporate on this instrument. I wouldn't say that trombone is specifically harder to play in tune. It's just incredibly easy to play out of tune. And so once you start playing these more intricate ideas that have lots of alterations that are maybe crunchy against the chord, and if you're not playing in tune, you're just gonna sound like a hot mess. So you really wanna find ideas that you can hear, that you can sing. A lot of these I would really encourage you to sing first, which is probably gonna be challenging. They're not always the most singable things. And then get them on your instrument, practice them slow to really make sure you have good command over them. Choose just a couple. Don't feel like you gotta practice a million of these. Get a couple of them under your fingers and see how they treat you so you can get that sound in your ear. And then try to move them into some playing in some safe places, maybe on a blues or on another tune that you feel really confident, so you can try to get them working in time context and hearing how they sound against the chord. All right, see you in the woodshed.